Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by a return guest, Dr. Matti Häyry. He is professor of philosophy at Aalto University School of Business in Finland. Last time we talked about his book on antinatalism, and today we're talking about his latest book, Pure Cloning. So, Matti, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on again.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be here.
So start by telling us then, what is pure and impure cloning?
Well, cloning, as you means producing genetic copies or genetic near copies. There's some mitochondrial, whatever, somewhere in there of an organism, so copies. And when people started to talk about human cloning 50, 60 years ago, they also talked about genetic enhancements, about making people better, either by selection before the new individual even exists, or by gene technology when they do exist. And this is what Tuija Takala and I call in our book impure cloning. The book's name is Pure Cloning. But impure cloning is cloning mixed with something else. And most debates about cloning have at least an element of this impurity somehow ingrained in them. Now, our innovation, so to speak, is to remove this impurity from the discussion and talk about cloning and only about cloning, without any selection or genetic manipulation, just about producing a genetic copy or near copy of an existing human individual. And this is what we call pure cloning. So to summarize, pure cloning is just cloning. Impure cloning is cloning plus something else.
Okay. And in the book, you go through different kinds of objections to human cloning, because it's human cloning that we're focusing on mostly here. Start by telling us about theological objections. What is this kind of objection?
Well, different world religions have different attitudes on human cloning. And to name a few, there's Buddhism, there's Islam, and Catholic Christianity and conservative Protestant Christianity. These have a negative view on human cloning. They are saying, no, shouldn't do that. And then we have Hinduism and Judaism and moderately Protestant Christianity who have a moderately cautious view, and they are saying, well, maybe if you prove this and that and the other. And the theological objections typically emphasize the aspect of playing God in one way or another. So applying complicated technology to reproduction, and in this case human reproduction, is too dangerous for fallible, weak, idiotic human beings to handle. Something will go wrong, they say. If not concretely, then at least humankind will be exposed to hubris, the excessive pride and a deceptive sense of control. So this is the argument from playing God. It doesn't really need to have anything to do with God, except that God as a concept is an all-knowing, all-powerful being, and fallible human beings are not. Now, there is a funny episode early on when in 1997 the Roman Catholic Church seemed to be saying for a short while, that human clones would have no souls, and that's why we shouldn't make them. This was a view that was publicized, and then the church retracted the view almost immediately. But that episode in the history of the ethics of cloning inspired Tuija, main author in here, and me to write and produce a rock opera called Playing God, which we wrote and produced and performed all over, including in the end in an off-Broadway musical theater, the K Playhouse in Manhattan in 2015, to a full house, by the way. So cloning has been good to us.
So apart from the theological objections, what is the legal status of cloning? I mean, what does the law have to say about it?
Negatively, the cloning of non-human beings is not particularly restricted. The list of mammals that have been cloned, when I last checked, included at least cows, mice, rats, goats, pigs, rabbits, cats, horses, and dogs. And then when you go down the complexity ladder of beings, then other animals and organisms are fairly free game. Nobody bats an eyelid if they are copied and cloned and produced. It's the cloning of humans that seems to be the problem. And human cloning by the nuclear transfer method. So the nuclear transfer method is merging a nucleus from one organism with an egg from which the nucleus has been removed of another organism, putting them together and doing something magical, and then it comes alive and starts developing that combination. And that has been human cloning by nuclear transfer method. It has been legally prohibited around the world since 1997. There was a flurry of legislation saying that we shouldn't do that. Nobody knew how to do it, but exactly with humans, but it was prohibited all the same. And that, of course, was the year when Dolly the sheep was cloned in Scotland, and then lawgivers simply just woke up to the possibility of a similar attempt in humans. But to your question, the legal status of human cloning, not permitted. No.
Mm-hmm. In the book, you also go through three main kinds of theoretical moralities, namely utilitarian, deontological, and teleological moralities. Tell us first about utilitarian moralities.
I'm just thinking, are we making it sound like a moral philosophy 101 here? If we are going to, well, perhaps we are. Perhaps that's okay. A little repetition for everyone. So the classical utilitarian rule is that we should always aim to maximize good. And it's measurable good. I mean, any moral theory could say good, but this is somehow measurable well-being or pleasure or something like that. And now legislation and social policy and even public opinion, insofar as we can control it, should follow this principle of maximizing good. And this means that when we are doing that in legislation and social policy in particular, then the excluded alternatives are arbitrary dictatorship, authoritarian measures. We shouldn't do something just because a dictator is saying so, or we shouldn't be doing them on sentimental responses. So democracy gone sour in that end with unpredictable consequences is not allowed within the utilitarian. It's a very rational thing. Just maximize the well-being and be done with it. Now, the maximization of good or well-being should, however, and this is the second main tenet of utilitarians, it should be moderated by what is called the harm principle. It says that we should not interfere with one another's freedom unless the exercise of that freedom would be harmful to someone else. I shouldn't hold your hand from moving unless it is approaching my nose. And then I can stop it. I can interfere with your freedom if you're about to harm me. Now, if both of these requirements are taken seriously, then we have a morality or political ideology that states two things, actually, and in this order. First, don't harm anyone else, including your citizens if you are a legislator, unless they are harming others. And secondly, and only secondly, promote everybody's good when it can be done without causing harm. So that's utilitarianism for you.
And among the utilitarians, we have specifically the bio-utilitarians, which I think are the ones that would apply the most in the case of cloning specifically. So what are the bio-utilitarians and what kinds of arguments do they have in favor of cloning?
Well, the name bioutilitarian can be applied to philosophers who, first of all, reject traditional and sentimental reactions against new technologies. That would be what the first principle of utilitarianism rules out. But who also argue that technologies should be allowed and even encouraged because of the benefits that they can bring. We'll get back to that can. Now, genetic manipulation can lead to finding a cure for cancer. Human cloning can lead to advances in reproductive autonomy. People who cannot have children of their own now could perhaps clone themselves or their partners or someone to have these children, perhaps themselves or their partners if they wanted to have biological replicas of themselves, whatever. Now, as long as this is physically dangerous, clones have health problems or cloning is problematic technically, it should not be done according to bioutilitarians. But as soon as the procedure can be made safe, then it should be permitted, because otherwise it would just be authoritarian or sentimental objections to it. So harm to traditional values or outraged feelings of the citizens, which some people think are good legal arguments for bioutilitarians, they have no value. These are not admissible as evidence.
And what are the main challenges then to the bioutilitarian analysis?
It is mainly the frequent use of the word can. It's a question of modality. It's not that it is or it should be, it is that it can be. Technologies can have good applications. They can benefit humanity. They can be safe. But are they? So those who advocate a little bit more caution say that we should know more before we launch into dangerous experiments. And my co-author Tuija Takala has given a name for the bioutilitarian ethos here. It can be called the hopeful principle. Now, from environmental policies, as you know, we all know its opposite number, which is the precautionary principle. And the precautionary principle is saying, if in doubt, don't do it. But the hopeful principle turns this around and says, if there is hope, do it. So, and this is what bioutilitarians regularly stand by. If it can cure cancer, then who cares about possible dangers? And the critics of bioutilitarians, of course, point out that this approach is a little bit reckless for their taste.
So I asked you, when it comes to utilitarianism, I asked you about cloning in general, but when it comes to pure cloning specifically, is there a positive utilitarian case for it?
There is a positive utilitarian case. In the book, we use, with Tuija, we use an example that we invented in the aftermath of Dolly's cloning 30 years ago now, soon. A couple loses their child, horrible car accident or something like that. They cannot have children of their own anymore. Something happens to a reproductive organism in that same accident. Would it be wrong of them to clone the lost child and have their child back? Very sentimental, very appealing. Many people think that the couple now should have even if they, on technical grounds, hold that cloning is wrong, they would say that, oh, it would be so wonderful if they had this child. And if it's not wrong, then that's your positive utilitarian case for pure cloning. There's no genetic enhancement involved, just the creation of the new whole, whatever, individual.
So we've talked about utilitarianism. Now to get into deontology and specifically Kantian deontology, does it have arguments in favor and against cloning, or simply arguments against it?
It has both. The main Kantian rule is that you should always respect humanity in yourself and in others. So treat humanity as an end in itself and never just as a means. And that's the rule. And from there on, all hell breaks loose and everything is interpretation. You know, how do you treat humanity as an end exactly? And how do you treat humanity as a means in yourself and in others? So there are many readings of that. Now, many Kantian ethicists believe that producing a child by cloning would mean treating it as a mere means. The child would just be an instrument for the parents to have offspring. And particularly if it's impure cloning, it's offspring whose features and characteristics they would know in advance. So that's manipulation in there too. Some permissive Kantians believe that the rules should be applied a little more leniently. And they say that hang on, the interpretation of the principle, parents do not treat a child only as a means to their own ends, if they simultaneously wish and expect and hope that the child will come to have a good life of its own independently.
So before we get into teleological moralities, I have sort of a more general question. In regards to the clash between consequentialist and deontological philosophers, is it still visible in today's debates?
I think it is, and this all started already in the 1960s. So gene science began to emerge, and ethicists had to say something about it. We always have to say something about everything. Now, utilitarian or consequentialist philosophers said, good, go ahead. And then Kantian or deontological philosophers said, bad, stop at once. And this distinction is still very much alive. Utilitarians will, as a rule, have unquestioningly permissive views on cloning, and Kantians will have more restrictive views on it. Of course, there is variation, but that's the general rule. And this difference is also often linked to the liberal-conservative divide in ethical and political ideologies.
So when it comes now to teleological moralities, since people are probably more familiar with utilitarian and deontological moralities, tell us first, what are teleological moralities?
Okay, so now we come to the Moral Philosophy 101, part 3. So, part 1, utilitarians are concerned about consequences, how much well-being or bad for you it will produce. Kantians are concerned about sticking to reasoned principles, like the humanity principle, always treat humanity as an end. Now, teleological, and this is the oldest moral theory in European moral philosophy, mostly Aristotelian ethicists are concerned about what is natural or normal and right for the species we are talking about. And for humankind, they often say it is natural and normal and right for the species to try to survive, find nutrition and shelter, have children, raise your children to continue the family line. And that is natural. And it's natural, it's normal. It is also natural and normal and right to act according to your reason. But the dictates of reason, since Aristotle, are basically essentially the same as these dictates of our bodily nature. And now in bioethics, the most popular teleological approach is neo-Thomism. That's the official morality and philosophy of the Roman Catholic Church, and it is a 19th century formulation of the philosophies of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas.
And which kinds of theological moralities apply to debates surrounding cloning then?
An alternative to neo-Thomism would be virtue ethics, which would be more directly derived from Aristotle's thinking. This would be the Nicomachean ethics directly read. And this would emphasize the golden mean, doing everything in good proportion. Good proportion, not too much, not too little, just the right amount would be the golden mean. And this approach has not, to our knowledge, been fully developed in the context of cloning, because the debate has been dominated by neo-Thomism and its official or semi-official applications. And in these, the verdict is ultimately made actually by some kind of the council of the wise. I mean, the logic is that ordinary people, you and I, cannot make considered judgments in difficult cases. We don't know all the facts, but more importantly, we don't know all the moral factors that are relevant to the case, and we don't know how to apply them. And so I'm trying not to be impolite or unfriendly, but the impression I'm getting is that only only a fully credited neo-Thomist philosopher is up to the challenge.
And what kinds of arguments do these teleological moralities produce in favor or against pure cloning?
Well, the ones we know of are neo-Thomist, and according to them, cloning humans would be wrong, and this has something to do with playing God again, or trying to exercise too much control in reproduction or something. We explain all that in detail in the book. So that would be the neo-Thomist thing. The virtue ethical alternative would be to think, and this would be interesting to develop, it would be to think in terms of excesses and deficiencies and the golden mean. I mean, to ask questions like, do we fear cloning too much? Or are we not being cautious enough about it? Do we fear it too little? And if either of these is the case, then in the original Aristotelian virtue ethical model, those are vices. We are doing an emotional reaction of the wrong type, and cloning would be vicious or wrong. But then, of course, if you could prove that cloning is the golden mean between too much fear and too little fear, then it would be virtuous and right. Well, it has not been developed, and our main objection in the book is to both of these approaches is that they are not transparent or understandable. The council may have made this decision or that decision, but why did they make it? If I cannot understand it, it cannot be right.
So we've talked about theoretical moralities, and now I would like to get into ideological rationalities. And in the book, you talk about two different sets of 4 principles, and I would like to start with the Georgetown principles that include beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. So could you explain each of them?
Yes, in the 1970s, ethicists and biomedical researchers in the United States decided that they want to encapsulate or collect together all moral concerns into a set of simple rules that researchers and medical professionals could then use. And the first rendition were the Beaumont principles. Originally, there were only 3 of them, and then they grew into 4. And now Georgetown University philosophers Tom Beecham, a Kantian, and James Childress, a utilitarian, they put their heads together and they formulated the set which is now known as the 4 principles of bioethics, the ones that you mentioned: beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. Now, beneficence and non-maleficence were together as a utilitarian principle in the Beaumont principles still, but then Beecham and Childress decided that it makes more sense to talk about not harming separately and then benefiting separately, which I think makes good sense. As I explained utilitarianism, it does make sense. And now Beecham and Childress originally argued that these principles can be based on all valid moral theories, by which they meant their own, the Kantian and the utilitarian theories. But they then, perhaps some friends whispered in their ears, there's this Aristotelian approach as well. So they included the Aristotelian approach, and then they diluted the theoretical content and ended up saying 20 years ago that the principles that they have formulated, they reflect a shared universal common morality, which means that every one of us believes in them. There have been objections to that one.
And based on these Georgetown principles, how should cloning be approached? And can we derive both arguments in favor and against it from these principles?
Yes, there would be arguments both for and against. Now, many things here depend on the facts and on their interpretation. Now, does cloning produce a benefit? Mm-hmm. Is it important enough? Would it harm those created? Would it harm some others? Would it promote autonomy? Would it violate autonomy? Would it be equitable and fair, or would it be unfair? And so on and so forth. So the background ideology of the Georgetown principles and the Beaumont principles before that, that the background is liberal and outcome oriented. Now, liberal in the sense of promoting freedom, not liberal in the current American sense when it means socialism or something awful like that, social responsibility. And this this background guides the application to real life cases. The result for decades has been that autonomy, the freedom to choose, will get emphasized in these. Autonomy will be the first principle, the first among equals. As long as no one comes to direct and concrete harm, autonomy and freedom should rule. And now, still, 30 years on, cloning as a technology is still unsafe, as far as we know. So the current verdict still is don't do it, but with the proviso that once it is not dangerous anymore, then the situation can be reassessed, and if people's autonomy says we'd like to do it, and if there's no clear harm that we can predict coming out of it, then we should do it. So the conclusion resembles the one that was reached by the bioutilitarians. So they go very much hand in hand in this particular case.
And then an alternative to the Georgetown four principles is the Barcelona Declaration. What is that?
Well, already in the 1990s, many of us in Europe and in Latin America and Asia and Africa were getting frustrated and tired and bored with the Georgetown principles. They were so obviously born in the United States. They were so obviously liberal in their then understanding of, in the North American sense, and capitalism and consumerism friendly, that we said, no, we want something more. And some of us wanted more social responsibility. Others wanted more respect for traditional values, and still others wanted some deeper philosophical reflection. By this time, Wiedemann Childress were saying that it's a common morality and you cannot argue with that. And we said, yes, we are philosophers, we can argue with anything. So a group of European ethicists at this point managed to get somehow funding from the European Commission to produce an alternative to the Georgetown principle. And the result then of their 3-4 years of work, 20 people altogether and all the people they solicited to help. And the result was the Barcelona Declaration, published in 2000, and defined a new set of rules. And that was less liberal in that sense, less utilitarian, less individualistic, and it had more emphasis on the ideals of communality and spirituality and the intrinsic morality of human actions.
And as in the case of the Georgetown principles, the Barcelona Declaration also includes 4 main principles, that is, autonomy, dignity, integrity, and vulnerability. Could you explain them?
Yes, well, autonomy in this set of rules, it's not the consumer's freedom to choose anymore. It is, in this set of rules, it's inseparable from dignity. Now we are working more in a Kantian framework. In line with the Kantian humanity principle, our autonomy as rational beings is the basis of our human dignity. And that in turn is inviolable as a gift from God or nature. And we don't have to think about God or nature literally. It's just a figure of speech. It's a given. It's something that we haven't made ourselves. That's the important bit of the combination of autonomy and dignity now. Now, the principle of integrity, the third one, it posits that we are not purely intellectual or rational beings. So this is going a step further from the Kantian thing. The standard critique of Kantian morality is that it's too intellectual, too cerebral, too brain-oriented, or too rational. And now integrity is saying that we have a body, or to say it in another way, we are a body. So we are a body, a given material essence, a thing. And this thing also has to be respected, and it has to be respected as diligently as our free choices. So it's not only about consumer choices. If we are making the wrong consumer choices, then someone wiser than us can, in the name of our integrity, say that we are doing the wrong choice and prevent us from doing it. So that's respect for our persons transcends our own volition, to put it technically. Now, vulnerability brings neo-Thomism into the model in a way that I don't understand, but I can still explain it. People are vulnerable. And the Georgetown reaction would be to remove the vulnerability. Oh, you're vulnerable. Oh, let me take care of, let me cure your wounds, or make sure that you don't hurt yourself anymore. But not so in the Barcelona Declaration, because it's based on the neo-Thomistic idea that we must recognize human frailty, human weakness, and we must embrace it, not try to get rid of it.
So how do these Barcelona Declaration principles apply to thinking about pure cloning?
I cannot say for sure how exactly the proponents of the principles would apply them. I'm not one of the Council of the Wise, but their case against human cloning often seems to be based on the impure dimensions, the assumption that the new individuals would be improved or enhanced somehow in the process. Now, in the case of pure cloning, the problem could be that the individuals born would, in a sense, have pre-lived lives. They would live in the shadow of the earlier one, so to speak. Their futures would be known to others in a way that their lives shouldn't be known. This is now assuming that a person has already lived a full life for at least some time. And now we know what sicknesses they will face and how they will develop and so on. And a person's life, according to this kind of thinking, should be an unknown, mysterious gift, as I said. And not to build any straw man here, the birth of one clone would not be the end of the world. I mean, yes, the Roman Catholic Council inadvertently said that clones would not have souls. They retracted from that one. It's not about one clone. One clone will not explode our democratic way of thinking or our religion or anything. It is the increasingly technological, reifying, instrumentalizing nature of this kind of reproduction that is in court here. That is what is blamed. It's a critique of modernity, really.
And one final approach that you talk about in your book has to do with feminist bioethics. What is that?
Well, we don't actually go into contemporary feminist thinking at all. Not being experts in the field, our fear was that we'd make a horrible mess of it. And instead, we just cited some historical examples and used them to illustrate, throw light on the case of pure cloning. And one example that we used was Mary Shelley's story of Dr. Frankenstein and his infamous creation. And as we point out, the monster here is not the creature like in all the movies, but Frankenstein himself, because he creates this child of his and then notices that it's ugly and then runs away in horror and abandons his child when it turns out to be ugly. So the monster is Frankenstein, not having a child of his liking and then turning away from it. Now, anyway, the process is faintly analogical to cloning. There's a collection of body parts, like in we had the one nucleus. And for Dr. Frankenstein collects body parts from morgues and medical operation theaters and graveyards and what have you. So that's one part of the thing. And then there's the other part of body part, which in the case of nuclear transfer cloning is the nucleus, which has been removed from an egg. And then they are put together like Dr. Frankenstein does. Then something magical happens Electricity has been suggested in the movies, and electricity is what does the trick in nuclear transfer cloning. So, and then we have a new individual there. And now this we are sort of arguing with Tuija in the book could be the basis of a feminist critique. Because the feminist critique could be saying that women as a creative force are now forgotten totally in this process. And then the technology that is used instead of letting women do their thing, technology can produce only monsters when the female creative force is, or something like that.
Yeah, I understand. So I have just one last set of two questions regarding the potential relationship between cloning, or pure cloning more specifically, and reproduction in general. So do the arguments against pure cloning also apply to reproduction in general?
Yes, they do, and this is actually the hidden message of the book. You see, all this sleight of hand talk about cloning, for all that, this is its real point. The real point of the book is that a rejection of pure cloning is at the same time also a rejection of all reproduction, all childbearing. So the endless debates on the nuclear transfer method and rogue scientists trying to use it on humans and dignity and autonomy and integrity, they wouldn't have motivated Tuija and me to write the book. We've been doing this since Dolly. There's nothing new under the sun in there. But our genius masterstroke, was confining the discussion to pure cloning, and that's our key, and that gave us the strength to try once again. Now forget about the genetic enhancements and other extras, just talk about cloning as any reproduction, as the image, an image of, well, I can say the image of all reproduction. Now the best, hardest to refute arguments against pure cloning, they always center around the ideas of mastery and manipulation. So it would be wrong to put other human beings in a situation where they are at the mercy of their masters and manipulators. And in the case of impure cloning, the argument is that the selection, I'll take this, not that, or enhancement, I will mold it in my own image, they are the main culprits. And if you choose your clone children and change its genetic characteristics for the better, you become their technological overlord, and you shouldn't do that. But in the case of pure cloning, the role of technology in that sense is eliminated. It's just you and your child, whatever the details of the child's coming to existence. Now, if the argument then persists, then bringing someone into being without their permission, without their consent is wrong. And that's then where you have it. The case of pure cloning shows that this is not about cloning at all. It's about bringing people into this world. The same arguments apply. If you are prepared to reject cloning, pure cloning, you should be prepared to reject all human reproduction. And the funny thing here is that the arguments against pure cloning, the ones that survive liberal and moderate objections, are quite conservative and stem from distinctly pro-natalist views. So neo-Thomism is a notable example. So here we have proven that the Catholic Church is actually against all having children. And the Catholic Church has an antinatalist agenda, after all, which means that we must have twisted their words somehow to reach this indisputable antinatalist conclusion. But when you're writing a book like that, you do it so tightly that I cannot honestly see where we went wrong. I mean, we must have gone wrong somewhere, but I don't know where. So I'm waiting eagerly for people to read the book and tell me what went astray.
Yeah, but then I mean to try to establish a link. I guess that to a certain extent you've already established this link there, but to try to establish a link to the topic that we covered, that was the central topic of our previous conversation. How does this all tie to antinatalism then?
Well, this is the connection to antinatalism. Now, if you are arguing against pure cloning, and if you are saying that it doesn't matter whether there are any enhancements or any selection or anything, if you are just saying that you shouldn't, even if it can be made safe, you shouldn't produce children in this way, then what is the difference from there to any other? I mean, you can slide down the scale from cloning to the use of in vitro fertilization to the use of an emergency room for deliveries, for this, that, and then when all the technology, the medical technology is gone, what you have there is the baby, and that was the forbidden thing in here.
Right. Okay, great. So the book is again Pure Cloning. I'm leaving a link to it in the description of the interview, as well as a link to our first talk. And Matti, apart from the book, where can people find your work on the internet?
I'm thinking that the best place these days is the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. There I am.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will also link to it in the description. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show again. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you. Always happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you liked it, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, Learning and Development Done Differently. Check their website at enlights.com, and also please consider supporting the show on Patreon or PayPal. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters: Per Ergo Larsen, Jerry Mullerens, Frederick Sunda, Bernardo Seixas, Olaf Alex, Adam Kessel, Matthew Whittingburg, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollis, Eric Alenia, John Connors, Philip Forrest Connolly, Dan Demetri, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Phil Kavanagh, Mikkel Stormir, Samuel André, Francis Ford, Tiago Nunes, Fergal Cossen, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Jonathan Librant, João Linhares, Stantantia, Samuel Correia, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, João Eira, Tom Hummel, Sardas France, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Romain Roach, Diego Londonho Correia, Yannick Puntar, Dana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavlo Stasevski, Nelek Bach, Guy Madison, Gary G. Alman, Sam Afzal, Adrian Yeager, Paul Tolentino, João Barbosa, Julian Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Douglas Fry, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Ponce Cortez, Ursula Litsky, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Sonny Smith, John Wiseman, Daniel Friedman, William Buckner, Paul George Arnaud, Luke Loaki, Georgios Theophanos, Chris Williamson, Peter Wolozin, David Williams, Diogo Costa, Anton Erickson, Charles Murray, Alex Shaw, Maury Martinez, Coralie Chevalier, Bangalore Atheists, Larry Dealey Jr., Old Erringbon, Sterry, Michael Bailey, Dan Sperber, Robert Grassi, Igor N., Jeff McMahon, Jake Zool, Barnabas Radix, Mark Campbell, Thomas Dovner, Luke Nissen, Chris Story, Kimberly Johnson, Benjamin Galbert, Jessica Nowicki, Linda Brandon, Nicholas Carlson, Ismail Benzliman, George Coriatis, Valentin Steinman, Per Crowley, Kate Van Goller, Alexander Hubbard, Liam Dunaway, BR, Masood Ali Mohammadi, Perpendicular, Jonas Hertner, Ursula Goodenough, Gregory Hastings, David Pinsoff, Sean Nelson, Mike Lavigne, and Dios Necht. A special thanks to my producers, Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Tom Vanagdam, Bernard Ugnik, Curtis Dixon, Benedict Mueller, Thomas Trumbull, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, John Carlo Montenegro, Alnick Ortiz, and Nick Golden, and to my executive producers, Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, Bogdan Kanivets, and Rosie. Thank you for all.